dissolving the subject. So when we look out into the world in a very simple way, in a typical moment-to-moment experience of what's happening right in front of our face, we usually, until we break this spell or dissolve this filter, we usually assume and very quickly experience. So the assumption and the experience are almost the same thing experientially, or they seem to arise together as one, but they're actually not. So the assumption, the experience is that there's a subject somewhere here, somewhere in here, or this body, or even this awareness. And then there's that which the subject is aware of, or that which the subject is experiencing. So similar to a camera. There's a camera here, and then the camera is experiencing an object out there. So if, say, the camera is pointed to a vase, then the film produced by that, or the screen that's being watched, will look like a vase at a distance. But the assumption is that that vase was viewed through a certain lens or a point of view or a camera. We make that assumption when we look at an object on a screen simply because we experience everything that way ourselves. We experience a subject here and an object out there. The object being the external world, objects in the external world, people, etc. Now, the point of this kind of investigation isn't to conceptually convince you that that's not the case. Like, it's not a philosophical argument that there really is no subject and object. There's no point in doing that, for me at least. When it comes to realization, it has to be directly experienced. It has to be a direct insight, or it's not valuable. So when I talk in this way, I'm suggesting that you actually take this up as an exploration yourself, or an inquiry yourself, and see what you actually find or don't find, rather than intellectually take on board what I'm saying to be true, or even imagine it, which is a strange thing, but we can do that. We can sort of imagine some version of non-separation, but we're not actually experiencing it. So this is experience centered. This is the key to this is experience, not understanding. So I say this a lot, but I just want to be clear before we start, because this is not the kind of thing that's going to be helpful to understand. You just have to experience it. And the other thing I should say is it can take some time to dissolve this. Everybody's different, but for some people, this could take quite a while. So understand, that this is going to take time and may take some sustained work, sustained effort, and investigation. But you can dissolve this perceptual filter of subject and object. Mostly it feels like you're dissolving the subject, or you're trying to, say, locate the subject, or you're trying to see how the subject experience comes into being or into play. So it really is centered around the subject, because just the way this functions, we kind of overlook that sense of a subject all the time. And yet the experience of separation, of the world being out there and me being in here, seems to be there all the time. So it just turns out that by investigating the subject, you can dissolve that. And there are other ways to do it, I'm sure. And sometimes it actually happens spontaneously. But in this setting, or in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to investigate the mechanism of subject and object in a very direct way. So I'm going to change my phone setting really quick. So the first thing I want to say about this is that if there's a lot of, say, reactivity, repressed emotion, etc., this can be very difficult, darn near impossible. Mostly because reactivity and fear, repressed fear, tend to get really stirred up when we start to enter something that's unknown to us, or something that isn't known in the way we're used to. And this investigation is directly doing that. We're directly sort of entering a space that's not what we're used to experiencing. So very quickly and without notice most of the time, the defense mechanism prevents that from happening. So it may not feel like we have a lot of fear around this. It may not feel like we're getting suddenly reactive, but you just may find it very slippery if there's a lot of reactivity, because your mind will just try to sidestep this, dodge it, get bored with it, move on, get distracted. It's very, very easy to overlook the fact that we're really just pretty averse to moving into the unknown territory of non-dualistic experience. So, with that said, just pick any object in your experience. And when I say object, it really can even be like a shape, something in front of you, maybe a rectangle or a color pattern, or it can be something that looks like a specific object, like a lamp or like a picture on the wall or your hands, anything. And just notice the visual experience of that. And then ask yourself, where does it feel like that is? And where does it feel like I am? And if the subject-object construct is intact, it will almost always be very simple and very obvious seeming to conclude that there's an object out there. It might be here, and it might be out here, and it might be 10 miles away, but it seems like it's out there. And it's almost defined by being apart from the subject, or the sense of me, the center of me, right? So when this subject-object construct is intact, it almost always feels like that instantly. You don't have to really think about it. It's just seemingly that way. So that's good. That's good that we at least know where we are with this. We know what we're experiencing consciously. We're consciously aware that there seems to be a subject or a sense of me or a sense of self or a sense of consciousness or a sense of awareness, and then an object which is apart from it. Now, I want to say something specific about awareness here, because there's a lot of awareness type teachings that really reify awareness. I have a video called The Awareness Trap if you want to understand what I'm talking about when I say that. But awareness can seem like a much more, I should say a much less centered experience, a more slippery experience, but it's still a subject. It can still be a subject, and often is. It's just a sort of formless subject, okay? And then everything else in the universe is an object to that subject. So it's like things appear in awareness, things come and go in awareness. Awareness is just merely aware, and experiences arise and fall within awareness, yeah? That's reifying awareness. That's taking awareness as the subject. So just know, even if that's happening, you can still do this. But it's usually much more simple than that. It's usually just a mundane, simple observation that, yeah, there's a light right there and I'm right here, and there's definitely some kind of distance between them, and or there's something that's literally defining this as something separate from that. They're two different things, two different experiences, right? That's what I'm looking for. So start with that and see, is that obvious to you? And usually it will be. So once you can perceive or recognize the perception or become aware of the perception, sometimes you have to slow your mind enough down to even do this. But once you become aware of that perception, at least now you have something simple to work with, right? Subject, object. There's an object out there, subject in here, right? So how are we going to work with that? Well, there are a lot of different ways to do it. One way I'm going to suggest now is put your attention wherever it seems like the subject is. The thing that's aware, the experience that's aware, the perception that's aware, the space of you, the center of your conscious experience right now. That's what I mean by subject. So at least with this exercise, don't worry about trying to find it precisely. Just sort of feel where it is. And again, noticing it seems to be apart from whatever the object is. Now pick an object, anything, something visual. Well, you can do this with other senses, but I think visual sense is maybe a little easier to describe because we have a lot of language around space. So pick something visual, and then notice where that seems to be. So we noticed where the sense of subject seems to be, Now we notice where the sense of object seems to be. And move your attention between them. Subject, object, and just try to keep it just generally in that vicinity without thinking too much. Don't analyze this, right? Subject, object, subject, object, self, move your attention, other, self, other. Okay? This in and of itself may be very valuable to you. It may be a transformative practice. You can just sit here and do this if you want to, right? Or you can find a nuanced way that makes sense to you to look into something that piques your curiosity, and that's fine too. So take your time with this. Maybe do that for a week. Subject, object. Subject, object. Do that with anything. Maybe not while you're driving or operating dangerous machinery, but anytime other than that, you can do this. When you're talking to someone, when you're sitting, when you're laying down, when you're doing simple tasks. Subject, object. Okay? Now, that's step one. Do that for a week, right? Step two, once you've sort of gotten that down to where you can almost do it automatically, now what I want you to do is see if you can notice the subject and object simultaneously. It'll be either yes, I can, no, I can't, or I'm not sure. If it's yes, I can, great, just stay with that. Stay with it. If it's no, I can't, one of two things are probably happening. One is the mind's either getting revved up, you're starting to analyze or doubt, right? Oh no, I can't do this. I don't know why, blah, blah, blah. Whatever the mind's saying, right? That's one possibility of why you might not be able to do this. The other possibility, and along the same lines, the mind might say it's impossible. You can't do that. There's too much separation, right? Which is just a thought, right? But if that thought's too compelling and it leads you to thought, then it may be really hard to do this. The second case of how it might be hard is you may actually be able to do it for a moment, subject-object as one experience, and then something emotional comes. Something feels scary, something feels reactive, something feels restless, something feels resistant. Those are the 3 R's. I just made that up. Reactivity, resistance, and restlessness. But yeah, anything physical can come up, a physical sensation that's like, ooh, this is intense. But you can actually touch in, at least momentarily, to the subject-object experience overlapped, being the same, or at least overlapping. And if you don't know, it's usually a thought. If you don't know, it's usually analysis, right? So if you can keep the attention in the subject and object simultaneously, and if you, actually, let me start by saying if you can't, just go back to the first step and then try again later. If you can, stay with the subject and object experience simultaneously. Then what I would suggest you do is look through the experience as closely as you can with your attention, like parsing through it, and see, is there a place where the subject and object overlap one another? Or can you actually keep your attention on them fully at the same time such that there really is no difference? Now, it may feel like they're overlapping. Like I can keep my attention like here and there at the same time, but they're still kind of separate but connected almost. It might feel like that. Yeah. Now, if that's the case, I would, and that may be the case for most people, I don't know for sure, but if that's the case, that's fine. What I would say is look really precisely at what evidence you have that there's actually something connecting them, like a bridge. Is there actually a bridge connecting the subject to the object? Or is that imagined? Is there something you're imagining? You can also just move your attention slowly between them, subject, object, subject, object. And see, are they connected and one is being emphasized more than the other? How's that happening? How's that working? Until it comes to this place where you can't really find either one anymore. Now, this could happen while you're practicing this for a short time, but then later on it feels very dualistic again. And that's fine if that happens. Just come back and do this again. And at some point, you won't actually be able to tell the difference. You might, you will in a thought, but in the direct experience of this right here, you won't actually be able to distinguish subject from object. You'll see that the subject-object experience that you had been assuming was real the whole time was never actually there because you never found it. And that leads me to another sort of trap to mention. You can conclude because you can't find it in a short time that it's not there. And that could afford you a little bit of peace or freedom or an experience in the moment. But the key to this is actually dissolving the filter. So don't just take one experience as gospel and then learn that the seeming truth that there's no subject and object, but actually keep going back to it until it's obvious. Similar to self, you could hear about the doctrine of no self very early on. You could hear about that and never had any kind of awakening at all, and you can believe it, but that's not the realization of no self. It's not even awakening, right? Similarly, you often do get tastes of this early on. It's not uncommon, but keep going until it's obvious, until there's literally no way to discern or determine subject from object, because there is no subject and object. The apparent duality coming into apparent being in the mind creates the illusion of both. Neither one ever existed, but you have to see that very clearly. So going through these steps can be really helpful. And if you can get to the second step where you can actually experience them simultaneously, then you can break this spell for sure. No doubt about it. Just, it takes some time though. And just keep your attention or keep alert for any sort of mental activity that's just pulling you down a mind road, because it's pretty slippery with this stuff. Subject, object. Subject, object, self, other, until they're just one. Or the experience of being able to parse subject from object, or split subject from object, or experience subject from object is gone. Let me know. I really want you to let me know how it goes though, because I can also add other nuances to this if people get sort of stuck in certain areas.